Before time itself began, in the throne room of eternity, there existed a being of unimaginable beauty and power. His name was Lucifer, the morning star, the light-bearer who walked among flames of fire in the very presence of God. Covered in precious stones and perfected in wisdom, he led the worship of heaven with a voice like celestial symphonies. But in the heart of this perfect creation, a shadow stirred. Pride whispered its poison, and the most glorious angel ever made dared to speak 5 words that would shatter paradise forever: "I will be like God." What happened next ignited a war that would span from the heights of heaven to the depths of hell, a cosmic battle that still rages today. Long before the world existed, before stars filled the night sky, heaven was already filled with beings of light and power. Among all these created beings, one stood out above the rest. His name was Lucifer, which means light-bearer or morning star. This wasn't just a pretty title. It described exactly what he was: a being who carried light, who radiated brilliance wherever he went. The prophet Ezekiel received a vision that pulled back the curtain on this ancient reality. In Ezekiel chapter 28, verse 12, God spoke through the prophet, saying, "You were the seal of perfection, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty." Think about those words for a moment. The seal of perfection. When a king wanted to mark something as officially his, as complete and authorized, he would press his seal into wax. Lucifer was like that seal. He represented the complete and perfect work of God's creative power. Nothing was missing from him. Nothing was flawed. But his perfection wasn't just about appearance. The verse tells us he was full of wisdom. His mind worked with absolute clarity. He understood the ways of God with a depth that few other beings could match. When he thought, his thoughts were clear and true. There was no confusion in him, no ignorance, no limitation to his mental capacity. And then there was his beauty. The scripture says he was perfect in beauty. Lucifer's beauty was of a different order entirely. It was perfection itself. Every aspect of his appearance reflected the artistic genius of his creator. There was nothing awkward about him, nothing out of place, nothing that could be improved. Ezekiel continues in verse 13, describing something extraordinary. "You were in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was your covering. The sardius, topaz, and diamond, beryl, onyx, and jasper, sapphire, turquoise, and emerald with gold." This Eden mentioned here isn't the same garden where Adam and Eve would later walk. This was the Eden of God, the original paradise in the heavenly realm, and Lucifer had access to it. Notice what covered him: precious stones. 9 different types of gems adorned his being. These weren't decorations he chose for himself. They were part of his very nature, woven into his being by God's own hand. And among all these stones, gold, the most precious metal, served as the settings that held them in place. The verse continues, "The workmanship of your timbrels and pipes was prepared for you on the day you were created." This phrase reveals something important about Lucifer's purpose. Timbrels and pipes are musical instruments. The language here suggests that Lucifer himself was designed to produce music and worship. He was created on a specific day with a specific purpose, and that purpose was connected to bringing glory to God through beauty and sound. In Ezekiel 28, verse 14, God continues describing Lucifer's original state. "You were the anointed cherub who covers. I established you. You were on the holy mountain of God. You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones." Every word in this verse reveals something crucial about who Lucifer was and what he did. First, he was a cherub. In the biblical understanding, cherubim are not chubby baby angels you see in paintings. They are mighty, powerful beings who serve in the immediate presence of God. Throughout Scripture, whenever the glory and holiness of God appear, cherubim are there. These beings represent the highest order of angels, those closest to the throne of God himself. But Lucifer wasn't just any cherub. He was the anointed cherub. To be anointed means to be set apart for a special purpose, to be chosen and consecrated for a specific role. Kings were anointed. Priests were anointed. Lucifer carried this anointing as a cherub, which means God himself had designated him for a unique position that no other cherub held. And what was that position? He was the cherub who covers. In the tabernacle and later in the temple, the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant covered the mercy seat with their wings. They created a covering, a protection, a sacred space around the very presence of God. Lucifer's role was similar, but even more direct. He served as a covering, a guardian, someone who stood in the presence of divine holiness. The verse says, "I established you." God personally put Lucifer in this position. This wasn't a job Lucifer worked his way into or earned through effort. God created him for this specific purpose and placed him exactly where he wanted him. Lucifer's position wasn't temporary or uncertain. It was established by the Creator of all things. Then comes another remarkable phrase. You were on the holy mountain of God. Mountains in biblical language often represent places of divine encounter, places where heaven and earth meet. But this holy mountain wasn't on earth. This was the mountain of God in heaven itself, the place where his throne sits, and Lucifer had access to it. But he didn't just stand there frozen in one spot. The scripture says, "You walked back and forth in the midst of fiery stones." Picture this, a being of light and beauty moving freely through an environment of supernatural fire and crystalline glory. These fiery stones weren't ordinary rocks. They were part of the environment of God's immediate presence, burning with holiness, and Lucifer walked among them. This walking back and forth suggests activity, purpose, movement with intention. He wasn't just standing guard like a statue. He was actively engaged in his role, moving through the presence of God, functioning in his capacity as the anointed cherub. Think about what this means. Every other created being had to maintain some distance from the full intensity of God's presence. But not Lucifer. He was built for it. He was designed to function in that environment. His very nature allowed him to exist where others couldn't go. He knew the presence of God in a way that few others did. Now we come to something that seems almost impossible to understand. Ezekiel 28 verse 15 states clearly, "You were perfect in your ways from the day you were created, till iniquity was found in you." Read that again, slowly. Perfect. Not mostly good, not better than average. Perfect. From the very moment God created Lucifer, everything about him worked exactly as it should. His thoughts were right, his actions were right, his attitudes were right. There was no darkness in him, no tendency toward evil, no hidden flaw waiting to emerge. He functioned in complete alignment with God's design. This perfection wasn't just moral goodness, it was complete perfection in every dimension of his existence. His wisdom operated without error. His beauty remained unmarred by any defect. His strength was used properly. His will was aligned with God's will. He was, in every sense of the word, a perfect creation. The verse specifies, "From the day you were created." This tells us something important. Lucifer had a beginning. He wasn't eternal like God. There was a specific moment when God spoke him into existence, and from that very first moment, Lucifer was perfect. He didn't have to grow into perfection. He started perfect, created that way by a perfect creator, and this perfection continued. The verse says, "He was perfect in your ways." Ways means paths, conduct, manner of life. Everything Lucifer did, every path he walked, every choice he made, all of it was perfect. Day after day, moment after moment, he lived in this state of complete rightness. How long did this perfection last? We don't know exactly. The Bible doesn't give us a timeline, but the phrase, "till iniquity was found in you," tells us it wasn't forever. For some period, perhaps a very long time, Lucifer existed in this perfect state. He walked among the fiery stones, served as the covering cherub, and did it all without any sin, without any rebellion, without any flaw. Every moment he stood in God's presence, he stood there as a perfect being. Every task he performed flawlessly. Every thought he thought aligned with truth. This wasn't pretending, he was genuinely, completely, perfectly good. And God saw this perfection. God, who knows all things, who sees into the deepest parts of every heart, looked at Lucifer and saw nothing wrong. There was nothing to correct, nothing to improve, nothing to warn him about. Lucifer wasn't deceiving God or hiding secret sins. He was actually truly perfect. But then comes that haunting phrase, "till iniquity was found in you." The word "till" marks a change, a turning point, an end to what had been. The perfection that seemed so solid, so complete, so permanent, it didn't last. Something happened. Somehow, in a being that was perfect, iniquity appeared. Something shifted inside Lucifer. In a heart that had known only perfection, a new kind of thought began to form. The prophet Isaiah captured this moment in chapter 14, verses 12 through 14. "How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High." These words were said in your heart. This is where it started, not in actions others could see, not in words others could hear, but in the private thoughts of Lucifer's own heart. Before any rebellion became visible, something was stirring in the hidden places of his inner being. And what was stirring? Pride, but not just any pride. This was pride of a cosmic scale. Pride that wasn't satisfied with being the highest of created beings, but wanted to go higher still. Notice the repetition, I will, I will, I will, I will, I will. 5 times Lucifer declared his intention. This is the essence of pride, the elevation of self, the assertion of personal desire over divine order. I will ascend into heaven. Lucifer was already in heaven, but this phrase means something more. He wanted to ascend to the highest place in heaven, to rise above his established position. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. The stars of God likely refer to the angels. Lucifer wanted his authority to be supreme among all created beings. I will sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. This mount was where God assembled the heavenly host. Lucifer wanted to sit there, to take the seat of authority. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. Clouds in biblical imagery often represent the glory and presence of God. Lucifer wanted to rise above even these symbols of divine presence. And finally, I will be like the Most High. Here is the heart of Lucifer's pride laid bare. He didn't just want a better position, he wanted to be like God. But how does a perfect being come to think such thoughts? Ezekiel 28 verse 17 gives us the answer. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. His beauty became the gateway to pride. Instead of seeing his beauty as a gift from God, he began to see it as his own. He looked at himself and became impressed with what he saw. His heart was lifted up. He was no longer looking at God, he was looking at himself, and this pride didn't stay small. It corrupted his wisdom. That perfect wisdom, that clear understanding, it all became twisted. He started using his intelligence not to serve God, but to plan his own elevation. Every gift Lucifer possessed came from God's hand. But something happens when pride enters the heart. Gifts that were meant to point to the giver become mirrors that reflect only the receiver. Ezekiel 28 verse 17 shows us exactly how this corruption worked. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor. The very qualities that made Lucifer magnificent became the instruments of his downfall. Let's think about his beauty first. God had crafted Lucifer with extraordinary care. He was covered with precious stones set in gold. When light hit him, he must have blazed with colors beyond description. Originally, this beauty served a purpose. It drew attention, but that attention was meant to flow through Lucifer to God. But pride changes the direction of that flow. Instead of being a window, Lucifer became a mirror. Instead of reflecting God's glory, he absorbed it. His beauty, which should have been a constant reminder of God's creative power, became in his own mind evidence of his own greatness. Your heart was lifted up because of your beauty. The more he looked at his own magnificence, the more impressed he became with himself. He forgot that he didn't create his own beauty. He started to think of his beauty as his own possession, his own achievement. And this led to something even more dangerous, the corruption of his wisdom. The verse says, "You corrupted your wisdom for the sake of your splendor." The word corrupted means to ruin, to mar, to make something decay. Lucifer took his perfect wisdom and bent it toward a wrong purpose. How did he corrupt his wisdom? By using it to serve his splendor instead of serving God. His thinking became focused on one question: how can I increase my own glory? His wisdom, which was supposed to help him understand God's purposes, became a strategic tool for self-promotion. Lucifer started using his brilliant mind to justify what he wanted, instead of to understand what was true. He began to rationalize his pride. His wisdom was no longer serving truth, it was serving his ego. And he did all this for the sake of your splendor. His glory became the thing he valued most. Everything else, even truth itself, became secondary to maintaining and increasing his own glory. This is what corruption looks like, taking something good and redirecting it towards something wrong. Beauty is not bad. Wisdom is not bad. But when these gifts are turned inward, when they serve self instead of serving God, they become corrupted. Verse 18 continues, "You defiled your sanctuaries by the multitude of your iniquities, by the iniquity of your trading." His iniquity defiled the holy places where he served. The phrase, "by the iniquity of your trading," suggests that Lucifer's corruption didn't stay internal. He began to trade in lies, to deal in deception, to exchange truth for falsehood. Lucifer's rebellion didn't stay private for long. The next step was perhaps the most destructive of all. He began to spread his rebellion to others. Revelation 12 verse 4 tells us something stunning. His tail drew a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. The stars of heaven here represent angels, and the verse tells us that a third of them, 1 out of every 3 angels, were drawn away by Lucifer's rebellion. How did this happen? How did Lucifer convince so many beings to join his rebellion? Remember, these were angels who also lived in God's presence. They also experienced his glory. Yet somehow, Lucifer persuaded them. The image of his tail drawing the stars suggests something subtle and sweeping. Lucifer's influence spread through heaven not like an obvious assault, but like a subtle corruption that pulled angels away before they fully realized what was happening. What did Lucifer say to them? He was full of wisdom. Even corrupted, his intelligence was formidable. He knew how to craft arguments, how to present ideas persuasively. He was perfect in beauty. His appearance gave him credibility. He was the anointed cherub. His position gave weight to his words. He likely started by planting seeds of doubt, questions that seemed innocent but carried hidden poison. He probably complained about limitations, making the perfect order of heaven seem restrictive. He may have painted a picture of a different way things could be, offering them a vision of independence. The fact that he succeeded with so many angels shows how persuasive he was. These weren't weak-minded beings. They were faithful servants who loved God. But Lucifer's influence was so strong that he pulled them away from truth. Verse 16 in Ezekiel 28 describes the result. By the abundance of your trading, you became filled with violence within, and you sinned. Lucifer was dealing, negotiating, exchanging ideas with other angels. And these dealings were filled with violence. The violence of disruption, of breaking what should remain whole. Picture heaven during this time. On the surface, everything might have looked normal, but underneath, something dark was spreading. Whispered conversations. Angels gathering in groups, questions being raised, doubts being planted, loyalties being tested. As more angels aligned with Lucifer, the division in heaven grew. Lines were being drawn, sides were forming. The unity that had always characterized heaven was fracturing. What began as a private thought had become a movement, a faction, an army. The moment had come when whispered rebellion could no longer stay hidden. What Lucifer had been planning in secret, what he had been spreading among the angels through careful persuasion, was about to break out into the open. Heaven, which had known only peace and harmony since its creation, was about to witness something it had never seen before: war. The Apostle John, while exiled on the island of Patmos, received a vision of these ancient events. In Revelation chapter 12, verse 7, he recorded what he saw, and war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. These simple words describe a moment of cosmic significance. War broke out in heaven, not on earth, not in some distant realm, but in heaven itself, the dwelling place of God, the realm of perfection and holiness. This wasn't a misunderstanding that escalated. This wasn't an accident or a surprise attack. This was a deliberate choice by Lucifer to openly challenge God's authority. Everything that had been building in secret, the pride, the corruption, the persuasion of other angels, now erupted into open conflict. Lucifer was no longer content with plotting and planning. He was ready to fight for what he wanted. The verse identifies the two sides clearly. On one side stood Michael and his angels. On the other side stood the dragon and his angels. Notice that Lucifer is now called the dragon in this passage. The beautiful light-bearer, the anointed cherub, had become something else entirely. A dragon is a creature of destruction and terror, far removed from the glorious being Lucifer once was. His corruption was now complete enough that heaven itself recognized him not as an angel of light, but as a monster. And he wasn't alone. The verse says his angels. A third of heaven's angels, drawn in by his lies and persuasion, now stood with him in rebellion. These angels who had served God faithfully, who had known his presence and experienced his goodness, had made their choice. They had sided with Lucifer against the Creator. What triggered this moment? What made the rebellion move from secret plotting to open warfare? The Bible doesn't give us every detail, but we can understand that there comes a point where rebellion can no longer hide. Perhaps God confronted Lucifer directly. Perhaps Michael, seeing what was happening, challenged the corruption spreading through heaven. Perhaps Lucifer himself decided the time had come to make his move openly. Whatever the specific trigger, the result was clear. Battle lines were drawn. Angels who had existed together in harmony now faced each other as enemies. The unity of heaven was shattered, peace was broken, and the first war in all of creation was about to begin. Think about what this meant for heaven in that moment. Every angel had to choose. There was no neutral ground, no sitting on the sidelines, no waiting to see who would win. Michael and his angels stood on one side, the dragon and his angels stood on the other. Every being in heaven had to decide, would they remain loyal to God, or would they follow Lucifer in his rebellion? Some angels made their choice quickly, their loyalty to God never wavering. Others perhaps struggled, torn between the persuasive arguments Lucifer had been making and their knowledge of God's goodness. But in the end, everyone chose. 2/3 remained faithful. 1/3 followed the dragon into rebellion. The declaration of war wasn't just about fighting, it was about authority. It was about who had the right to rule. Lucifer was openly challenging God's position as the Most High. He was saying through his actions, "I will not submit, I will not serve, I will fight for the throne." And every angel who stood with him was making the same declaration. Standing against Lucifer and his rebellious host was an archangel named Michael. The book of Revelation identifies him clearly in chapter 12, verse 7, as the one who led the fight against the dragon. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon. While Lucifer had been the anointed cherub who covers, holding a position of supreme honor, Michael held a different kind of role. He was a warrior, a defender, a protector of God's order. The name Michael means, "Who is like God?" This question itself was a declaration. While Lucifer was claiming, "I will be like the Most High," Michael's very name stood as a challenge to that claim. Who is like God? The answer, of course, is no one. No created being, no matter how beautiful or wise or powerful, can be like God. Michael's name was a constant reminder of this truth, but Michael didn't fight alone. The verse says, Michael and his angels. Just as Lucifer had drawn 1/3 of the angels to his side, Michael had the loyalty of the remaining 2/3. These were angels who had heard Lucifer's arguments and rejected them. They had seen his corruption and refused to follow it. They had witnessed his pride and chosen humility instead. What made these angels remain loyal? They hadn't seen anything different than the angels who rebelled. They existed in the same heaven, served the same God, witnessed the same events. But somewhere in their hearts, they held fast to truth. They remembered that everything they had was a gift from God. They valued their Creator above their own desires. They chose worship over pride. These loyal angels understood something crucial. Serving God wasn't slavery or limitation. It was their purpose, their joy, their perfect function. They had been created to worship and serve, and they found fulfillment in doing exactly that. Lucifer's promises of independence and self-rule didn't tempt them because they knew that true freedom came from being what you were designed to be. Michael, as their leader, represented this loyalty in its purest form. He wasn't fighting for personal gain or glory. He wasn't defending his own position or authority. He was fighting for the honor of God and for the preservation of heaven's order. Where Lucifer fought for self, Michael fought for his Creator. The contrast between these two leaders couldn't be more stark. Lucifer was driven by pride, by the desire to elevate himself. Michael was driven by devotion, by the desire to protect God's glory. Lucifer sought to take what wasn't his. Michael sought to defend what rightfully belonged to God alone. And behind each leader stood their angels, their followers, their army. On Lucifer's side were those who had been convinced that they deserved more, that God was somehow holding them back, that rebellion was the path to freedom. On Michael's side were those who understood that God had already given them everything they needed, that his authority was right and good, that loyalty was the path to true joy. The Bible doesn't tell us much about how Michael prepared for this battle. We don't know if he trained his angels or gave them speeches or organized them into formations. What we do know is that he was ready. When war broke out, he and his angels were prepared to fight. They didn't hesitate. They didn't question. They stood firm against the rebellion that threatened to tear heaven apart. In the book of Jude, verse 9, we get a glimpse of Michael's character. Yet Michael the archangel, in contending with the devil when he disputed about the body of Moses, dared not bring against him a reviling accusation, but said, "The Lord rebuke you." This moment, which happened much later, shows us something important about Michael. Even when dealing with the devil himself, even when he had every right to speak harshly, Michael remained respectful of authority. He didn't take judgment into his own hands. He appealed to the Lord. This same character was present during the war in heaven. Michael wasn't fighting because he hated Lucifer. He wasn't trying to prove himself superior. He was simply doing what needed to be done to protect God's authority and heaven's holiness. He fought with righteousness, not with pride. He led with humility, not with arrogance. What does war look like in heaven? We live in a physical world where battles involve weapons and blood and physical destruction. But heaven operates on a different level. The war that broke out there was a spiritual conflict, a clash of wills and powers that went beyond anything we can fully understand. Revelation 12 verse 7 simply states the reality. Michael and his angels fought with the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought. The word fought tells us this wasn't a simple disagreement or a quick skirmish. This was genuine warfare, a full conflict between two opposing forces. We can imagine the scene. Angels who had served side by side, who had worshipped together, who had known each other for ages, now facing each other in battle. The unity that had defined heaven was completely shattered. Brother stood against brother. Those who had been friends were now enemies. The harmony that had always characterized the heavenly realm was replaced with the chaos of war. What weapons did they use? The Bible doesn't describe physical swords or spears in this battle. Angels are spiritual beings, and their warfare was spiritual in nature. Perhaps they wielded the power God had given them, using their abilities not for service, but for combat. Perhaps the battle was fought with words and wills, with authority and resistance. But make no mistake, this was a real battle. Revelation 12 verse 8 tells us the intensity and the outcome, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. Lucifer and his angels fought with everything they had. They didn't hold back. They gave their full strength to the rebellion. They truly believed they could win, that their power combined with their numbers would be enough to overcome Michael and the loyal angels. They were wrong. They did not prevail. Despite all of Lucifer's wisdom, despite his beauty and his position and his persuasive power, despite having a third of heaven's angels on his side, the rebellion failed. The dragon and his angels could not win against those who fought for God. Think about what this battle revealed. Lucifer had been the anointed cherub who covers, one of the most powerful beings in creation. He had a third of the angels fighting with him. By any calculation, this should have been a significant force, yet they still lost. Why? Because power that rebels against its source cannot ultimately succeed. Lucifer's strength, his wisdom, his abilities, all of it came from God. He was trying to use gifts from God to fight against God. It was like trying to use borrowed money to rob the person who lent it to you. The very power he wielded in battle was power that wasn't truly his own. Michael and the loyal angels, on the other hand, fought in alignment with their Creator. They weren't fighting with stolen or corrupted power. They were operating exactly as they were designed to operate, using their gifts for the purpose they were meant to serve. Their strength came from the same source it had always come from, and that source supported their cause. The verse says, "Nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer." This is significant. The battle wasn't just about defeating Lucifer and his angels militarily. It was about removing them from heaven completely. They couldn't stay. Their presence had corrupted the holiness of that place. Their rebellion had made them incompatible with the purity of heaven. As the battle raged, it became increasingly clear which side would win. The loyal angels, fighting with righteousness and truth, pushed back against the rebellion. Every attack the dragon's forces made was countered. Every strategy they tried failed. The tide of battle turned decisively against them. Imagine Lucifer in that moment, watching his carefully planned rebellion fall apart. All his persuasive arguments, all his promises to the angels who followed him, all his confidence in his own power, none of it was enough. The one he had called himself equal to was proving to be far beyond him. The throne he had reached for remained completely out of reach. The war was lost. Despite everything Lucifer had planned, despite all his power and wisdom and the support of a third of heaven's angels, the rebellion had failed. Revelation 12 verse 8 declares the result clearly, but they did not prevail, nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer. They did not prevail. These 4 words sealed Lucifer's fate. His great rebellion, his attempt to ascend to the throne of God, his challenge to divine authority, it had all come to nothing. He had staked everything on this war, and he had lost. The being who once stood in perfection, who walked in the presence of God, who was full of wisdom and beautiful beyond measure, now stood defeated. The defeat wasn't partial or temporary, it was total and final. Lucifer could not win, he could never win. No matter how hard he fought, no matter what strategies he employed, no matter how many angels stood with him, victory was impossible. You cannot defeat the one who created you. You cannot overcome the source of your own existence. You cannot successfully rebel against infinite power. But the defeat went deeper than just losing a battle. The verse says, "Nor was a place found for them in heaven any longer." They weren't just defeated, they were evicted. Heaven itself rejected them. There was no corner they could retreat to, no place they could hide, no way for them to remain. Their presence had become incompatible with heaven's holiness. Think about what this meant for Lucifer. Heaven had been his home since the moment he was created. He had walked on the holy mountain of God. He had moved among the fiery stones. He had known the presence of God intimately. Every moment of his existence had been spent in that glorious place, and now it was closed to him forever. The door he had walked through so freely was now shut. The mountain he had climbed was now forbidden. The presence he had enjoyed was now removed from him. Everything familiar, everything he had known, everything that had defined his existence, all of it was taken away. Why such a harsh response? Because rebellion against God isn't a small thing. It's not a mistake that can be overlooked or a disagreement that can be worked out. Lucifer hadn't just broken a rule. He had attacked the very foundation of heaven's order. He had tried to tear down the throne of God. He had corrupted other angels and led them into sin. His presence in heaven was now poison, a spreading corruption that had to be removed. And so Michael and his angels, having won the battle, now executed the judgment. The defeated rebels would not remain in heaven. They would be cast out, expelled, removed completely from the realm they had tried to conquer. For Lucifer, the defeat must have been devastating. Everything he had convinced himself of was proven false. He wasn't equal to God. He couldn't ascend to the highest throne. His beauty and wisdom and power weren't sufficient. He had reached for divinity and grasped only his own destruction. All the angels who had followed him now saw the truth as well. The promises he had made to them were empty. The future he had painted for them was a lie. They had given up their place in heaven, their purpose and joy, for a rebellion that failed completely. Whatever freedom Lucifer had promised them, they were now more bound than ever. The defeat also revealed something crucial about God's nature. He is not threatened by rebellion. He doesn't fight desperately to hold on to power. He allows the challenge to come, and then he demonstrates that it was never a real challenge at all. Lucifer's war wasn't a close battle that could have gone either way. It was a foregone conclusion from the start. What happened next is described in vivid terms in Revelation 12 verse 9. So the great dragon was cast out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. He was cast to the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. The great dragon was cast out. The word cast is forceful. This wasn't a gentle sending away or a polite exile. This was a violent expulsion, a throwing out, a forceful removal. Michael and the loyal angels didn't escort Lucifer to the door and ask him to leave. They cast him out. They threw him out of heaven with power and finality. The verse gives him several names now. He is that serpent of old, a reference to his future role in deceiving Adam and Eve. He is the devil, which means accuser or slanderer. He is Satan, which means adversary or enemy. These names show his complete transformation. The light bearer had become the accuser. The morning star had become the adversary. The anointed cherub had become the serpent. The verse also describes his character. He deceives the whole world. Even in his defeat, he remained committed to deception. Truth had no place in him anymore. Where once he was full of wisdom, now he was full of lies. His corruption was complete. He was cast to the earth. After the expulsion from heaven, there had to be somewhere for him to go. The earth became his destination. Not the full earth that humans would later inhabit, but the realm below heaven, the space between the holy mountain of God and the physical world. He was hurled down, thrown from the heights of heaven to the lower regions, and his angels were cast out with him. Lucifer didn't fall alone. Every angel who had joined his rebellion shared his fate. They too were thrown out of heaven. They too lost their place in the presence of God. They too were expelled from the realm of light and holiness. Their choice to follow Lucifer had permanent consequences. They had sided with him in war, and now they shared his defeat and his exile. Isaiah the prophet also described this fall in chapter 14, verses 12 through 15. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! How you are cut down to the ground, you who weakened the nations! For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning! There is almost a tone of amazement in these words. The being who had stood so high had fallen so far. The one who was the seal of perfection was now cast out. The morning star had been extinguished. The fall was complete and shocking. How you are cut down to the ground! He wasn't just moved to a lower position. He was cut down, brought low, humbled in the most dramatic way possible. Everything he had tried to elevate was demolished. Every ambition he had pursued was crushed. He wanted to ascend, but instead he descended. He wanted to rise above, but instead he was thrown down. The passage reminds us of his declarations. I will ascend, I will exalt, I will sit, I will ascend, I will be like the Most High. 5 statements of prideful ambition. But then comes the reality. Yet you shall be brought down to Sheol, to the lowest depths of the pit. His 5 I wills were met with one divine you shall. And that divine decree overturned all his plans, from the highest heights to the lowest depths, from the presence of God to exile from heaven, from the anointed cherub to the cast-out dragon. The contrast couldn't be more extreme. Lucifer's fall was total, complete, and irreversible. The being who was cast out of heaven was not the same being who once walked among the fiery stones. Something fundamental had changed. Lucifer had transformed into Satan. The light-bearer had become the prince of darkness. The anointed cherub had become the enemy of God. This transformation wasn't just about a change in location or a loss of position. It was a change in nature, in character, in fundamental identity. Revelation 12 verse 9 makes this clear by listing his new names. That serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, who deceives the whole world. Each name reveals something about what he had become. That serpent of old speaks of cunning, deception, and danger. Serpents in biblical imagery are creatures that hide, that strike suddenly, that poison with their bite. Lucifer, who once radiated light and beauty, now operated in shadows and deception. The devil means accuser or slanderer. This title shows his new activity. Instead of leading worship, he would now bring accusations. Instead of reflecting God's glory, he would now distort God's character. Instead of building up, he would tear down. The voice that once produced music for worship now produced lies and condemnation. Satan means adversary or enemy. This is perhaps the most defining change. Lucifer had been on God's side, serving in his presence, aligned with his purposes. Now he was the opposite. He was God's adversary, his enemy, actively opposed to everything God wanted. Where once there was harmony, now there was opposition. Where once there was cooperation, now there was conflict. The verse adds that he deceives the whole world. Deception became his primary weapon. Having lost the war in heaven, he would now wage war on earth through lies. Unable to defeat God directly, he would attack God's creation. Unable to ascend to the throne, he would try to drag others down with him. This transformation was the natural result of his choices. When you reject truth, you embrace lies. When you rebel against your Creator, you become his enemy. When you corrupt the gifts you were given, you become a corrupted being yourself. Lucifer's pride, his rebellion, his defeat, all of it worked together to transform him from an angel of light into the father of lies. But something else is important to note. This transformation was permanent. Unlike humans who can repent and be forgiven, there was no path back for Satan. His choice was final. His corruption was complete. The door to heaven wasn't just temporarily closed. It was sealed forever. He would never again walk on the holy mountain. He would never again stand in the presence of God. He would never again know the joy and peace of perfect service. Ezekiel 28 verse 16 describes part of this change. Therefore I cast you as a profane thing out of the mountain of God, and I destroyed you, O covering cherub, from the midst of the fiery stones. God himself speaks these words, declaring the finality of Satan's fall. He was cast out as a profane thing, no longer holy, no longer pure, now contaminated and corrupting. I destroyed you, O covering cherub. The title he once held with honor, the covering cherub, was destroyed. He could no longer function in that role. He could no longer serve in that capacity. Everything that defined his original purpose was gone. He was unmade from his position, stripped of his office, removed from his function. From the midst of the fiery stones. He would never walk there again. The place where he had moved freely, where he had served in God's presence, was forever closed to him. Those fiery stones that represented holiness and divine glory, he had been removed from them permanently. The transformation was complete. Lucifer, the son of the morning, was gone. In his place stood Satan, the accuser, the adversary, the enemy of God and of all that is good. The beauty remained, perhaps, but it was now twisted beauty, corrupted glory, a mockery of what had been. The wisdom remained, but it was now turned toward evil purposes, toward deception and destruction. And he was not alone in this transformation. Revelation 12 verse 9 says, his angels were cast out with him. Every angel who had followed him into rebellion shared his fate. They too were transformed. They too became demons, fallen angels, servants of darkness instead of servants of light. Their choice had permanent consequences. After being cast out of heaven, the angels who had followed Satan in his rebellion underwent a complete transformation. They were no longer the holy beings they had been created to be. They had become something else entirely, demons, evil spirits, servants of darkness who would spend their existence opposing God and his purposes. The Apostle Peter wrote about their fate in his second letter, chapter 2, verse 4. For if God did not spare the angels who sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness, to be reserved for judgment. These angels who sinned, the ones who chose rebellion over loyalty, were not given a second chance. God didn't overlook their choice or offer them a path to restoration. Instead, they were cast down to hell. The word Peter uses for hell here is specific. In the original language, it refers to a place of darkness and confinement, a realm far removed from the light and glory of heaven. These fallen angels were delivered into chains of darkness. This doesn't necessarily mean physical chains like we would think of them, but rather limitations, restrictions, boundaries that God placed on their activities. They were no longer free to operate as they once had in heaven, and they are reserved for judgment. Their final fate isn't yet complete. They exist now in this fallen state, but a future judgment awaits them. Their rebellion brought immediate consequences: the loss of heaven, the transformation into demons, the confinement to darkness. But the ultimate punishment is still to come. Jude, in his short letter, verse 6, confirms this reality. And the angels who did not keep their proper domain, but left their own abode, he has reserved in everlasting chains under darkness for the judgment of the great day. These angels had a proper domain, a place where they belonged, a role they were meant to fulfill, but they didn't keep it. They abandoned their position. They left their own abode, their home in heaven, and chose rebellion instead. The consequence: everlasting chains under darkness. The word everlasting is significant. This isn't a temporary punishment or a brief exile. These chains are eternal. These demons will never return to what they once were. They will never again know the freedom and joy they experienced before their fall. Their choice was permanent, and so are its consequences. What are demons like? The Bible shows us throughout its pages that they are beings of evil and destruction. Where angels serve God and help people, demons oppose God and harm people. Where angels bring messages of hope and deliverance, demons bring temptation and torment. They retained some of their power and intelligence from their time as angels, but now all of it is twisted toward evil purposes. In the Gospels, we see Jesus encountering demons regularly. In Mark chapter 5, verses 2 through 5, there's an account of a man possessed by many demons. And when he had come out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit, who had his dwelling among the tombs. And no one could bind him, not even with chains, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains. And the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. And always, night and day, he was in the mountains and in the tombs, crying out and cutting himself with stones. This is what demons do. They cause torment, pain, and destruction. This man lived among tombs, was impossibly strong, couldn't be restrained, and hurt himself constantly. The demons inside him had stripped away his dignity, his peace, his ability to live a normal life. This is the nature of fallen angels. They destroy what God creates. They corrupt what God makes pure. They bring death where God brings life. But even in their fallen state, demons recognize who Jesus is. In the same passage, Mark 5, verse 7 records, "And he cried out with a loud voice and said, 'What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God that you do not torment me.'" The demons speaking through the man knew exactly who Jesus was. They called him Son of the Most High God. They recognized his authority and feared his power. This reveals something important. Demons know the truth about God. They aren't ignorant or confused about spiritual reality. They know who God is. They know Jesus is his Son, and they know they will eventually be judged. Yet this knowledge doesn't save them. They remain in their rebellion, opposing God even though they know they cannot win. James writes about this in his letter, chapter 2, verse 19. You believe that there is one God. You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. Demons believe in God. They don't doubt his existence or his power. In fact, they tremble at the thought of him. But their belief doesn't include submission or repentance. They believe and they rebel. They know and they oppose. They tremble and they continue in their evil. After his expulsion from heaven, Satan found himself in a very different position. He was no longer the anointed cherub who walked in God's presence. He was now a rebel, confined to a lower realm, stripped of his former glory, but still possessing significant power. The earth and the spiritual realm around it became his domain, though his authority was limited by God's sovereign control. Jesus himself spoke about Satan's domain. In John chapter 12, verse 31, he said, Now is the judgment of this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out. Jesus called Satan the ruler of this world. This doesn't mean Satan owns the earth or has ultimate authority over it. God remains sovereign over all creation. But it does mean Satan has been given a degree of influence and power in the earthly realm. The Apostle Paul echoed this understanding in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 2, verse 2, where he described people's former way of life, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. Paul calls Satan the prince of the power of the air. This title indicates Satan's domain in the spiritual realm that surrounds the earth. He operates in the unseen world, influencing and working through those who are disobedient to God. But Satan's power is not unlimited. He cannot do whatever he wants. He operates only within boundaries that God allows. The book of Job provides a clear example of this. In Job chapter 1, verses 9 through 12, we see an encounter between God and Satan. So Satan answered the Lord and said, Does Job fear God for nothing? Have you not made a hedge around him, around his household, and around all that he has on every side? You have blessed the work of his hands, and his possessions have increased in the land. But now stretch out your hand and touch all that he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on his person. So Satan went out from the presence of the Lord. This passage reveals several important truths about Satan's limited authority. First, Satan cannot touch God's people without permission. God had placed a protective hedge around Job that Satan couldn't cross. Second, even when God allowed Satan to test Job, strict limits were set. Satan could touch Job's possessions, but not Job himself. Later, in Job chapter 2, verses 4 through 6, Satan returned, and God gave him further permission, but again with limits. So Satan answered the Lord and said, Skin for skin. Yes, all that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand now, and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will surely curse you to your face. And the Lord said to Satan, Behold, he is in your hand, but spare his life. Satan could afflict Job's body, but he could not kill him. Even in his attack, Satan was restricted by God's command. This is the reality of Satan's domain. He has real power. He can cause real harm. He rules over a kingdom of darkness and influences the world system that opposes God. But he is not free. He is not equal to God. He is not operating outside of God's ultimate control. He is a defeated enemy on a leash, allowed to operate only within the boundaries God establishes. Peter warns believers about Satan's activity in his first letter, chapter 5, verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Satan walks about like a roaring lion. He is dangerous. He is predatory. He seeks to devour, to destroy, to consume. But notice the phrase, whom he may devour. There are some he cannot devour. His ability to destroy is limited. He can only harm those whom God allows him to harm. Satan's first recorded attack on humanity came in the Garden of Eden. God had created Adam and Eve and placed them in a perfect paradise. They had everything they needed, lived in harmony with God, and were given only one restriction: they must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Into this perfect setting came Satan, taking the form of a serpent to deceive the first humans. The book of Genesis, chapter 3, verses 1 through 5, records this encounter. Now the serpent was more cunning than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said to the woman, "Has God indeed said, 'You shall not eat of every tree of the garden'?" And the woman said to the serpent, "We may eat the fruit of the trees of the garden, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God has said, 'You shall not eat it, nor shall you touch it, lest you die.' Then the serpent said to the woman, 'You will not surely die, for God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.'" Notice how Satan operated. He came in disguise, hiding his true identity behind the form of a serpent. He was cunning, crafty, subtle in his approach. He didn't command Eve to sin. He didn't force her to disobey. Instead, he planted seeds of doubt through seemingly innocent questions. "Has God indeed said?" This was his opening move. He questioned whether God had really said what Eve understood him to say. He created uncertainty about God's clear command. This is still one of Satan's primary tactics, making people doubt what God has clearly revealed. When Eve responded by stating God's command, Satan directly contradicted it. "You will not surely die." This was a blatant lie, calling God a deceiver. Satan accused God of withholding something good from humanity, suggesting that God's command came from selfish motives rather than loving protection. Then came the final temptation. "You will be like God, knowing good and evil." Here was the same ambition that had led to Satan's own fall. He wanted to be like God, and now he was tempting humanity with the same prideful desire. He promised them godlike knowledge and status if they would only disobey. Eve fell for the deception. Genesis 3 verse 6 continues, "So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree desirable to make one wise, she took of its fruit and ate. She also gave to her husband with her, and he ate." The first sin entered the world through Satan's deception. Death came to humanity. Paradise was lost. The perfect relationship between God and mankind was broken. Why did Satan do this? Revelation chapter 12 verse 9 tells us his nature. He deceives the whole world. He couldn't directly attack God, so he attacked God's newest creation. He couldn't regain his place in heaven, so he tried to ruin God's plan for earth. He couldn't elevate himself, so he tried to bring humanity down. Later, Jesus would identify Satan as the one behind that serpent in Eden. In John chapter 8 verse 44, Jesus said to religious leaders who opposed him, "You are of your father the devil, and the desires of your father you want to do." He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. He was a murderer from the beginning. When did this murder begin? In the Garden of Eden, when Satan's lie brought death to humanity. He murdered Adam and Eve spiritually the moment they believed his deception and sinned against God. He does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. Satan cannot tell the truth. His very nature is deception. When he speaks a lie, he speaks from his own resources, for he is a liar and the father of it. Satan is the originator of lies, the father of deception. From the Garden of Eden onward, Satan has positioned himself as the enemy of humanity. He opposes people not because they have done something to harm him, but because they are created in God's image and loved by God. To hurt humanity is to hurt God's heart, and that is Satan's goal. The Apostle Peter described Satan's hostile intent in his first letter, chapter 5, verse 8. Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. The word adversary means opponent, enemy, one who stands against you. Satan is humanity's adversary. He is opposed to people's well-being, their relationship with God, their peace and joy. Peter uses the image of a roaring lion to describe Satan's nature. Lions are predators. They hunt, they stalk, they wait for the right moment to attack, and when they attack, they do so with the intent to kill and devour. This is how Satan operates toward humanity. He is constantly seeking opportunities to destroy lives, to ruin relationships, to bring people into sin and death. But Satan doesn't always appear as a roaring lion. Sometimes he disguises himself. Paul warned the Corinthians about this in his second letter, chapter 11, verse 14. And no wonder, for Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light. The devil who appears as a roaring lion also appears as an angel of light. He can make evil look good. He can make lies sound like truth. He can make destruction appear like freedom. Throughout the Bible, we see examples of Satan's opposition to humanity. In the book of Job, he brought suffering to a righteous man to try to turn him against God. In the Gospels, he tempted Jesus in the wilderness, trying to derail God's plan of salvation. In Paul's letters, he is described as the one who blinds the minds of unbelievers so they cannot see the truth of the gospel. Paul wrote about this in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 4, verses 3 and 4. But even if our gospel is veiled, it is veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age has blinded, who do not believe, lest the light of the gospel of the glory of Christ, who is the image of God, should shine on them. Satan is called the God of this age, and his work is to blind people's minds. He doesn't want them to see the truth. He doesn't want the light of the gospel to reach them. He actively works to keep people in darkness and deception. This is perhaps Satan's greatest attack on humanity, keeping them from knowing God. He can't ultimately destroy someone who belongs to God, but he can prevent people from ever coming to God in the first place. He can keep them blind to their need for salvation. He can distract them with worldly pleasures. He can convince them that God doesn't exist or doesn't care. Jesus described Satan's work using the parable of the sower in Matthew chapter 13, verses 18 and 19. Therefore hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, then the wicked one comes and snatches away what was sown in his heart. This is he who received seed by the wayside. When the word of God is shared, Satan immediately works to snatch it away before it can take root. He is that vigilant in his opposition to people coming to faith. The war that began in heaven continues on earth. Though Satan and his demons were defeated and cast out, they have not surrendered. They continue to fight, knowing their time is limited, working to oppose God's purposes and harm his people. This ongoing conflict is what the Bible calls spiritual warfare. Paul explained this warfare clearly in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 6, verses 11 and 12. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. For we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this age, against spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. We do not wrestle against flesh and blood. The real battle isn't against other people, even when people oppose us or harm us. The true enemy is spiritual. Behind the scenes of human conflict, there is a spiritual battle raging between the forces of good and the forces of evil. Paul lists the spiritual enemies, principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this age, spiritual hosts of wickedness in the heavenly places. These are various ranks and types of demonic forces organized under Satan's leadership. They operate in the spiritual realm, but influence events in the physical world. They work to advance Satan's agenda of deception, destruction, and opposition to God. The warfare is real and it affects believers directly. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians in his first letter, chapter 2, verse 18, "Therefore we wanted to come to you, even I, Paul, time and again, but Satan hindered us." Satan actively works to hinder the spread of the gospel and the work of God's people. He creates obstacles, causes difficulties, and opposes spiritual progress wherever he can. But believers are not defenseless. Paul continues in Ephesians chapter 6, verses 14 through 17. "Stand therefore, having girded your waist with truth, having put on the breastplate of righteousness, and having shod your feet with the preparation of the gospel of peace. Above all, taking the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked one, and take the helmet of salvation and the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God." God provides armor for this battle. Truth protects like a belt, righteousness guards like a breastplate, the gospel brings peace like good footwear, faith deflects attacks like a shield, salvation protects the mind like a helmet, and the word of God serves as an offensive weapon like a sword. Believers are equipped to stand firm and fight effectively in this spiritual warfare. James gives simple but powerful instruction in his letter, chapter 4, verse 7. "Therefore submit to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you." There are two parts to this command. First, submit to God. Place yourself under his authority. Align yourself with his will. Second, resist the devil. Stand firm against his attacks. Refuse his temptations. Oppose his work. The result? He will flee. Satan cannot stand against someone who is submitted to God and actively resisting him. Peter adds his voice in his first letter, chapter 5, verses 8 and 9. "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary the devil walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same sufferings are experienced by your brotherhood in the world." Believers must remain alert and vigilant. They must resist Satan while remaining steadfast in faith. The warfare also involves prayer. Paul wrote to the Ephesians in chapter 6, verse 18, "Praying always with all prayer and supplication in the Spirit, being watchful to this end, with all perseverance and supplication for all the saints." Prayer is a crucial weapon in spiritual warfare. Through prayer, believers access God's power, seek his protection, and intercede for one another. This warfare will continue until Jesus returns. Satan knows his time is limited, and this makes him more aggressive. Revelation chapter 12, verse 12 states, "Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you, having great wrath, because he knows that he has a short time." Though Satan continues to operate now, his final fate is already determined. The Bible makes clear that he will not escape judgment, and his eternal destiny is sealed. The war he started will end with his complete and permanent defeat. Jesus spoke about this final judgment in Matthew chapter 25, verse 41, describing what he will say to those who rejected him. "Then he will also say to those on the left hand, 'Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire, prepared for the devil and his angels.'" Notice that this everlasting fire was prepared specifically for the devil and his angels. It was created as their punishment, their final destination, the place where they will spend eternity. This judgment isn't a future possibility that might or might not happen. It's a certainty. The demons themselves know this. In Matthew chapter 8, verse 29, when Jesus encountered demons, they asked, "What have we to do with you, Jesus, you Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" The The demons recognized Jesus, and they knew there was an appointed time for their torment. They understood that judgment was coming. The book of Revelation describes Satan's final defeat in detail. In chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, it describes a period when Satan will be bound. Then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the key to the bottomless pit and a great chain in his hand. He laid hold of the dragon, that serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into the bottomless pit, and shut him up, and set a seal on him, so that he should deceive the nations no more, till the 1,000 years were finished. Satan will be completely restrained, unable to deceive or harm anyone during this time. He will be locked in the bottomless pit with a seal upon him. His power to influence the nations will be completely removed. After this period, Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10, describes what happens next. Now, when the 1,000 years have expired, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out to deceive the nations which are in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, to gather them together to battle, whose number is as the sand of the sea. They went up on the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. And fire came down from God out of heaven and devoured them. The devil who deceived them was cast into the lake of fire and brimstone, where the beast and the false prophet are, and they will be tormented day and night forever and ever. Even after being bound for 1,000 years, Satan returns to his nature. He immediately begins deceiving and gathering people for battle against God. But this final rebellion is short-lived. Fire from heaven devours his armies, and Satan himself is cast into the lake of fire and brimstone. This is his eternal destiny, not temporary punishment, not eventual release, not annihilation or ceasing to exist. He will be tormented day and night, forever and ever. The one who brought so much suffering and deception to humanity will experience unending torment himself. The one who tried to ascend to God's throne will be cast into the lowest pit, and he will not be alone. All the demons who followed him, all the fallen angels who joined his rebellion, will share his fate. They chose to rebel together, they were cast out together, and they will be judged together. This final judgment is irreversible. There is no appeal, no second chance, no possibility of redemption. If this story has impacted you, if learning about Lucifer's fall and Satan's defeat has opened your eyes to the spiritual battle that surrounds us, then make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. Share this video with your friends and family who need to understand the reality of spiritual warfare and the victory that belongs to God. Leave a comment below telling us what surprised you most about Lucifer's story. Your support helps us continue bringing these powerful biblical narratives to life. Remember, the war is already won. Jesus has defeated Satan at the cross. Stay strong in your faith, and we'll see you in the next video.